Hello and welcome to the Biotech 2050 podcast. Biotech 2050 is a think tank chronicling the disruptions changing the biotech industry over the next several decades. Check out our website at biotech2050.com. My name is Alok Tayi. I'm today's co-host. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vibe Bio, and Vibe is an AI platform that helps pharma make strategic decisions. I'm really excited today to be joined by Fred Aslan, the CEO of Artiva. We're live in San Francisco at JPM 2026, meeting with a suite of executives and leaders in the biotech industry, talking about the future of what our domain has to share. Today with Artiva, we're going to be learning a bit about both Fred's background, but then also the exciting work they're doing in the cell therapy domain and his view and growth for the organization. So, Fred, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You know, maybe to kick us off, would love it if you can give us a few words on your background and how you got to where you are today.
So I was born in Brazil. I came to the U.S. for college. I went through medical school. It was in medical school that I decided to make a transition over to industry. You know, I felt that in medicine, you know, you spend a lot of time learning a lot of content. And then I felt that once you choose a specialty, things become very algorithmic, you know? So I was having a hard time choosing just that one specialty that I was gonna just be doing for the rest of my life. And then parallel, I came to the realization that it takes so long for technology to actually get to market. And I was in medical school around the time of the genomics boom, right? So people were sequencing the genome. There was all this promise about new therapies that were gonna be coming in. And so that felt like the exciting area of medicine that I wanted to be a part of. So after medical school, I transitioned over to industry, and I did that by working in management consulting. So I worked at Boston Consulting Group for a couple of years. From there, I went on to a biotech company working in corporate development. I got my MBA, and then I spent 5-6 years working in venture capital, right? So that was a great way to see the breadth of technologies across indications, across the medical device space, biotech, diagnostics. And then after, 5-6 years, after having spent so much time with entrepreneurs sitting on the other side of the table, I felt that part of the job in investing, it's a triage job in many ways, right? You only have so many hours in the day, and you have to do a lot of due diligence in the companies that you're meeting with. So if you have constantly companies coming in, you have to figure out a way to triage all of these ideas. And so in many ways, you're looking for that kill. You know, what the entrepreneur is super excited and they're ready to conquer the world, and you're looking for that one fundamental flaw that makes you feel comfort that if you pass on that idea, this isn't the next Google, right? And so I just thought to myself, I'm spending a lot of time looking for flaws, and here are these really excited entrepreneurs who are super excited with their construction hat on. What would it be like to be on the other side of the table? So I started, that was my first venture into entrepreneurship. I started a medical device company that I ran for around 6-7 years. And then from there, I went on to another biotech company. And so this is really my third company. I've been CEO of Artiva for the last 5 years. So it's been a really good journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, amazing. And, given that you've checked off all the key bingo boxes in the life sciences space, right? Medical school, management consulting, medical device, now biotech. What's one consistent learning or observation you've had despite the industry or the functional area? Any particular threads that have kind of tied together all those experiences?
Yeah, I would say, what's interesting is when I hear myself describing all the different things I did, it all sounds very linear, like very logical, like it was all building blocks to get to a goal. But that was not how my career evolved. It was a series of being really excited about something. And then once I learned about it, there were things that I liked that I learned, but at the same time I realized that I was interested in doing something a little bit different, or that perhaps I could play to my competitive advantage in an area, And so I would say that the one consistency, the one advice I always give people is always don't think about the next career step as what is the best building block to prepare me to do this other thing. Think about what you actually really want to do, because then you'll be fired up to do it, you'll be really excited, and whether you want to continue doing it for a long time or not, you're going to enjoy it while you're doing it, and then from there you'll figure it out. In medicine, when you join medical school, it feels like depending on what you want to do, there's a very set path that you have to be on, and you have to follow every step, because if you don't take that right step, if you want to be a head of a department in an academic center, you can't go work in the community setting after residency, because now you're closing those doors. But when I went to business school, I was very focused on figuring out what is that right path that I need to be on. But every single speaker that would come in, I would ask them that question, and they'd be like, well, I kind of did this, and then from there I did that because somebody pointed me that way, and then from there I did the other thing. And I like that flexibility and freedom to just pursue whatever seems to make sense.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's a rarity to be able to have the luxury to be able to kind of go do that, a suite of different activities, right? I know, especially coming from the academic world, there's such a narrow, rigid pathway. Sounds like you've been able to truly expand your horizons in unique ways. That said, I'm curious, given Artiva's focus in the cell therapy space, there's been a lot of work that's happened over decades in that domain. Some success, a lot that have failed. Any chance you could just give us a quick synopsis of the cell therapy space at writ large, as well as some of the key bottlenecks or challenges that you think are holding the field back at present?
Yeah, so I would say it starts with auto CAR T around the 2015-16 timeframe. When the very first, should I explain a little bit how auto CAR T
Please.
works? So the basis around auto CAR T is that you're taking a patient's T cell, and then you are engineering it, and then you're giving it back to the patient, so that now this engineered T cell can actually hone in on what is an antigen sitting on the surface of a cancer cell, and it can go there and attack it, right? That was one of the most transformational, technologies, I think, if we look back at the last 10, 15 years. Just this ability to actually take patients that had aggressive NHL, and they probably had a median survival of around 6 months, and CAR T was able to drive that to 5 years. I mean, that's truly, not something incremental. And so there was a lot of excitement around it. A company called Kite, a company called Juno, they got acquired. And then the product launched, and it very quickly started to migrate from late line to earlier line, right? One of the things that was unfortunate about that is that people felt that it would work across a ton of different indications, and it turned out that it was actually most effective in some of the heme malignancies. It had a huge impact, and still does, in a number of the heme malignancies. So one thing is that there was this feeling that just doing that basic engineering on the T cells wasn't going to be enough. And the second drawback of auto CAR T is that it's really more of a procedure than a drug, right? So the full spectrum of activity here is that you come in once it's determined that you're eligible for auto CAR T. You go through apheresis. Think about almost like a dialysis, for over several hours. Your blood cycles through this machine so that they can collect it. Then you take that sample and it goes to manufacturing, right? And that manufacturing process is specifically for that patient because you can't mix samples, right? So that can take quite a bit of time, and in cancer that posed the problem because while you're waiting for that to be manufactured, many patients unfortunately would progress. Then you actually have to hospitalize the patient for the most part because that therapy can cause these two conditions, CRS and ICANS. And if you do happen to get those conditions and they're not controlled, you could end up at the ICU, right? And then the final thing is because the manufacturing is really catered to the patient, you can't do high scale, it's very expensive. So today it still costs over $100,000. There's some technologies being developed to try to lower that cost, but it's still nowhere near the cost of usual drugs like biologics, etc. So the thought was, is there a way to actually develop a technology where you don't actually have to make it auto, you can make it allo, right? So you take a source product and you can scale it and expand it such that it can be available to thousands of patients, right? And if you have a scalable process, chances are you can use all of that overhead and leverage this larger capacity to bring down the cost significantly. So, and then the final thing is you're looking for products that can potentially have the potential to not have as many side effects as what auto CAR T did, so that you don't have to hospitalize the patient. You can actually just give them IV infusions like one is used to doing in a community setting. And so Artiva is actually a company that was founded in 2019, but the technology underlying it comes from a Korean company that has been developing this technology since around 2006, 2008. They were the very first company, it's a Korean company called GC Cell. They were the first company to actually test giving an allogeneic NK cell from one patient and giving it to another patient, right? And that they developed for a long time a process to scale this technology. So we start off with umbilical cord units, we extract the NK cell, and then we're able to scale that dramatically. So from one umbilical cord unit, we can make thousands of doses of product that then you can use in patients. And because NK cells are known to have a much safer tolerability profile, you can actually give it IV in a community setting. So today, most of our patients that we're treating with autoimmune disease, and we can talk a little bit about our transition from oncology to autoimmune disease, most of those patients are being treated in rheumatology clinics where the rheumatologist is treating the patient in his or her infusion chair, and then the patient's going home, right? So it's a big change. So the angle here is that there's an opportunity here for this therapy, which we call AlloNK, to actually offer that efficacy that auto CAR T has demonstrated that one can do, but with a tolerability and format that is very convenient to the community setting, and with COGS that allows you to price this very differently than where today you have to price auto CAR T.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I feel like seeing the earlier iterations of cell therapies, you'd have to not only change, obviously, the COGS and the market access has challenges, but also the supply chain, right? Has to be built around this multi-day patient-specific approach. So it's exciting to see the prospects. One thing I'm curious about is, given the focus on RA, why that particular indication? And how'd you kind of go through the analysis to find the specific domain that you wanted to start with?
Yeah, so the auto CAR T did very well in the hematological malignancies because they were specifically going after B-cell cancers, right? So all of the effort with Artiva and with others in this space was around, can you kill all of the B cells? Because in cancer, if you can kill all of the B cells, then you are hopefully killing all of the cancer B cells. And then when the B cells reconstitute, they reconstitute with more of the healthy B cells that you want. There was academic work done in Germany in 2022, so that's only a few years ago, demonstrating that if you use auto CAR T in patients with autoimmune disease, you could actually have what the investigator called an immune reset. So by killing every one of the B cells in a patient that has a disease like lupus or RA or myositis or scleroderma, the B cells, when they come back with the naive phenotype, and many of the patients in this study were getting complete relief of their disease. And so our thinking at the time was, well, if we know, because we ran studies in cancer patients where we were able to see that we could deplete their B cells very deeply and to bring their cancer into remission. So we were thinking, well, if you can actually do that in cancer, which is a much higher bar, probably, than in autoimmune disease, then why not do it in autoimmune disease where there's a lot more patients and where it's a more nascent field for such an approach? So then, once we're in autoimmune disease and we're thinking about all the different indications, we try to play to the product's strength. What we saw is that the product actually was quite potent in its ability to eliminate B cells. But the product also was actually quite safe compared to many of the other cell therapy products or other biologics that are leveraging T cells. You see, what happens is this: when you use a T cell to kill a B cell, there's the possibility that you cause this side effect that I mentioned, CRS, right, or ICANS. When you use NK cells to kill B cells, you don't get that happening because of the mechanism of how the NK cells kill the B cells. So we felt if you could have a lot of potency, and at the same time, you have a product that is actually quite safe enough that you could give in a community setting, then why not go after the indications where there's the larger number of patients with an unmet need, and they're mostly found in the community setting, right? Whereas many other products where they have the opportunity to be very effective, but they have these significant side effects, it makes more sense to focus on indications where the patients have even more severe disease. They're already pretty concentrated around academic centers. If they have to be hospitalized, they'll agree to do it because of the severity of their disease. So we felt we had an early opportunity to go after indications that actually are bigger, and most of the patients are in the community setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you were to give advice to others who have an interesting platform or technology and are trying to figure out what indications to pursue, any particular piece of advice you'd offer, Joe?
Yeah, I think that you are a few things that come to mind. Number one, the problem in this industry is that sometimes there's a lot of people that are wedded to a particular product in development. And even though the data shows that the benefit is actually only incremental, you sort of become attached to that product and the cause. And it's hard for you to take a step back and say, is this the best use of my time? Or are there other products out there that could have an even bigger impact? So number one, my advice is always work on things that can actually be transformational. Otherwise, it's an uphill battle every step of the way. Number two, you have to watch closely to the competitive landscape, because if you are one of 10 companies that are all trying to do the same thing, then it's going to be really challenging. You're going to be constantly asked to compare yourself with everybody else that's actually doing something similar. And again, you don't want that. That creates a lot of headwind, because then a lot of time investors are unsure on who to invest in, because they're trying to figure out who's going to be the winner, who's going to be the loser.
Limited differentiation, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. And so we specifically wanted to go after an indication like RA because most people were not going after RA. So that would give us an opportunity to, one, play to the strengths of the product, as well as it would give ourselves an opportunity to go into an area that was less competitive. So perhaps those are the two things. Maybe the third thing is, whenever you're in your seat driving a company, you're always focused on that next milestone, right? And I think it's really important to be thinking all the way through, because a lot of times development should be a game of reducing most of the risks up front, so that then it's all about just pure execution and most of the risk is gone. And there's a lot of people that are developing products that you're going to run a trial. That trial may be successful, but you still haven't answered the key question that needs to be answered in order to know whether you're going to be successful in the next 2 or 3 chapters. So I always advise, think all the way to the end and then work backwards from there, because ideally you are knocking out big chunks of risk as you are moving along, and you're not just kicking the can down the road by doing something that you're likely to succeed in, but then the big challenge is going to be that next chapter.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a lot of really interesting details in there probably for founders and entrepreneurs to think about as they look at their next phase of product development. That said, I'm curious for Artiva today, how do you think about kind of 2026 and growth beyond your RA program? What does the rest of the pipeline look like? What are you most excited about beyond just RA?
Yeah, so this 6 months now, we guided that during this first half of 2026, there's 2 things that we're going to do. Number one is we're going to share our efficacy data in RA. So that's really important, because we have started to check the box on, is the mechanism working as we expected? Is the safety what we expected? And we've been checking these boxes, but the big question that people are asking is, how well does this work? And the second thing that we guided is that we'd be speaking with FDA about what a registrational trial would look like, right? So growth for the company would come in the form of actually moving into this next phase of development. Because once you're moving into a registrational trial, now you're beginning to think about what a potential launch would look like. How do you educate the physicians? How do you think about reimbursement? How do you think about getting this product out there? How do you scale your existing manufacturing capabilities even further? So there's a lot of work that gets done to prepare a product for a potential launch. And then beyond RA, the great thing about the academic study that I mentioned from 2022 is that apparently this mechanism appears to be applicable in a variety of different autoimmune diseases. So with this same product, we can actually pursue a number of different indications. So right now we're running a basket study that includes RA. We're also looking at myositis, scleroderma. We're also running a trial with lupus. So there's a variety of different indications, Sjogren's disease. So there's a variety of different indications that one can pursue. We landed on RA based on the things that we talked about, and then we're taking a data-driven approach to figure out what that next indication that we want to pursue would look like. And in an ideal world, the vision is that this is one product that can actually address a variety of different indications and is not just an incremental benefit to patients, but it's dramatically better than what's out there.
Yeah, well, I think obviously disease modifying is really where it's at, but I think it's also begets a moment of reflection when you think about how lucky we got to some extent that we found the impact of cell therapies on autoimmune conditions. Because it is a fairly recent discovered, right?
Right.
And I feel like most folks who maybe started out in the cell therapy space did not anticipate that, but maybe it was a great new path, I think, for patients in those areas. So I'm curious now, we've got, during our JPM interviews, we're doing a bunch of rapid fire questions. The first one I've got for you is on everyone's favorite two letters, AI.
Yeah, so to me, the big question for AI is, it sounds like AI is being used in a preclinical setting for you to determine which are the best candidates to go into the clinic. The big question I have is how predictive, how well can we use these tools to actually determine what happens in the clinic? Because my understanding of AI is you need to understand a lot of things to be able to be very predictive as to what happens. And we just don't have all of that information integrated in a way where you can just try to guess whether something is likely to work as well as you want and not to have the safety signal. So I would say that I am, cautiously optimistic that we're going to learn that we actually probably know more than we think we know, and that these predictive tools will be useful. But time will tell whether that's the case. Now, from an efficiency perspective, AI can be very valuable because now we're using it to create documents. So think about regulatory documents that are being prepared, market research. It's actually incredible how much you can actually, before you'd have to pay for these multi-$1,000 reports to get to something, and now it all comes pretty well packaged if you ask the right questions. So I think we will see the impact, but I do think that in healthcare, that may not be the very first place where we will see most of the impact. Unfortunately, I find that most of what I read about AI, whenever somebody talks about the impact of AI in healthcare, it's coming from somebody that doesn't know healthcare that well, And so there's a lot there that they say that I'm thinking like, I'm not sure that you understand this well enough because it is more complicated than you think.
Indeed. Well, as a former BCG consultant, I'm curious if you think that discipline, what its future is, given the capabilities that AI now allows for.
Yeah, I think it's kind of tricky because that primary research, which is based on combing the internet and trying to get primary sources, that now can be done through AI very easily. I think then that the BCG model is going to be around, again, strategy, the strategic options, and a lot of the interactions with people, right? Because a lot of the work, particularly the people-oriented aspects of the work, that's probably going to remain as it was. But when I joined BCG, it was all about spending hours combing the internet, looking for information and reading reports.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I would have a job, the same job at least that I had.
Well, I think to your point, I think it then hones individuals in on the areas where they have unique expertise and view and value to add. But next topic, China.
Yeah, so I think what has been kind of scary, so when I was an investor, it was very typical that you would find really good chemists that were decided to work on a particular target, and you knew that pretty much, you knew who was working on what. So you felt confident that even though you were making an investment and it could take 4 years for that product to actually get to market, you felt confident that you put really smart people to work on something. 4 years later, something's going to emerge, which is going to be pretty novel. I think that model now becomes really scary because you just don't know. You fund somebody to work on something, you just don't know what is being worked on, in the black box, and that could end up being really risky. I also find that in biotech, we used to use this notion of a drug hunter, this person that, because everything is resource constrained, the drug hunter is the person that sort of figures out where to prioritize resources. China seems to be doing everything in parallel. So it's like, look, we don't know enough. So why not run every experiment, and then whichever ones work, those are the ones we'll work on. That is a more logical way to do it than to rely on these special drug hunters with gut feelings and instincts of where they would go. So I do think that will cause a lot of disruption, but it could end up being healthy. I do think that it eliminates a lot of it makes some investing in earlier technologies riskier, but it could actually change where we end up focusing our expertise, in the US, as we think about if there's no more scarcity from targets that you're going after with different molecules, then perhaps the competitive advantage would be how quickly can you move, how smart can you choose indications, and things of this sort.
Maybe how proprietary your intellectual property is, right, and challenges. It makes sense. Last one, rare disease.
Yeah, so rare disease is an interesting one because I feel like rare disease is a huge unmet need with a limitless number of different indications that you have to go after. But in many ways, we have applied the typical drug development model to it, right? So we're taking something that works when you're trying to figure out in a small number of patients if this is going to work in a very large number of patients. But we need a new model in rare diseases where you don't have so many patients to actually lean on. You can't run the same type of statistics. So how do we make that experimentation, like real-time treatment and experimentation at the same time? How do we get things to not be, well, you're experimental and now you fall into this box and there's all sorts of limitations and restrictions to access, into something where you're learning at the same time as you're experimenting, because these patients have no other options. So I think it's very different to go to an RA patient and say, how would you like to not even try what's available and try an experimental therapy? But that's different in a really small indication where there are no available therapies. I'm sure patients are much more willing to take a risk if it could come with benefits.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, Fred, really grateful for you to come and join us today on the podcast and share a bit about Artiva and its future. Really excited to see what happens both with the RA study as well as with the other facets of the basket trial. So we'd love to have you on again and maybe meet up again at the next JPM.
That's great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.